Hi everyone, welcome back. In this lecture onwards, we'll start implementing exception handling in a banking application. Let us quickly take a look into how we are going to handle the exceptions in a Spring Boot REST API project. Well, whenever client sends a request, the controller will handle that request and it will send that request to the service. In a service, we basically write the logic to validate the request. Like first we'll check whether the account with a given ID is exist in database or not. If it is not exist, then we throw account exception. Once we throw the account exception, then we have to handle that exception and we need to prepare the error response for that exception and we need to send that error response back to the client, right? So for that, what we'll do, we'll create a global exception handler class. Within that, we will write a logic to handle specific exceptions as well as generic exceptions in a single place. So instead of writing the exception handling logic in each and every controller, we'll create a separate class as a common class and we'll call it as global exception handler, and within this class we keep all the exception handling related logic. Okay, so this is basically a flow. Whenever client sends a request, the controller will process that request and it will forward that request to the service. Service will validate the request. If there are any issues, then it will throw the exception, and then global exception handler will catch that exception. It will prefer the error response and it will send that error response back to the client. So this is the simple flow. Next, let us take a look into few key points about exception handling in a Spring Boot application. Well, handling exceptions in a Spring Boot REST APIs is typically done by using @controller_advice and @exception_handler annotations. Next, @controller_advice annotation enables global exception handling for controllers. So instead of writing the exception handling logic for each and every controller, we will create a separate class and we will annotate that class with @controller_advice annotation. And within that class, we'll write all the exception handling logic for all the controllers. So we'll basically keep all the exception handling logic in a single place. Next, @exception handler annotation defines the methods to handle specific exceptions within a controller or globally with @controller_advice class. So basically we use @exception handler annotation to handle the specific exceptions. So we'll see in a coding section how we can use these two annotations to handle the exceptions in a Spring Boot REST APIs. Alright, in next lecture we'll start implementing exception handling in our banking application. Alright, great. I will see you in the next lecture. Hi everyone, welcome back. In previous lecture we had a quick overview about how to handle the exceptions in a Spring Boot application. Well, before handling exceptions in a Spring Boot application, let us understand Spring Boot default exception handling. Well, if you go to our project in IntelliJ IDEA and go to account service sample class, within that go to get account by ID method. So within this method, here we have written a logic like if the account ID is not exist in database, then we throw the runtime exception, right? And if you test this REST API here, well, here I'm going to test get account by ID REST API, and look at here, we got the response. It says internal server error. Well, if you again go to the database first, and here let us select the rows from the accounts table, and here you can see the account ID 3 is not exist in the table, and here in a REST API URL we have passed with the account ID 3. Well, the account with the ID 3 is not exist in database, then we got a response like this, but this is not a correct response, right? So we have to get the error message properly. So here internal server error, so this is not a meaningful error message, right? So this is basically a technical term. And again, look at here the HTTP status 500 internal server error. So the status should be 404 not found, right? Because the account with ID 3 is not found, that's why the status should be 404 not found, but we are getting 500 internal server error. So this is the default Spring Boot exception handling. Now let us go ahead and let us implement exception handling in our banking application as per our requirement. So basically our requirement is like we need to send the status as a 404 in the response, and we need to also send the error message, that is meaningful error message, and we also need to send the error code in the response. Okay, so let us go ahead and let us see how to implement the exception handling in the banking application as per our requirement. So let us head over to the development steps. First step is create a custom exception named account exception. Second step is use account exception. Well, instead of using runtime exception, we will use account exception. Next step is create error details class to hold the error response. Next step is create a global exception handler to handle the specific exceptions as well as generic exception. Alright, so first step is create a custom exception named account exception. Let's go to our project in IntelliJ IDEA and let's first create a new package. So go to base package, right click new and then choose package. Let's give package name as exception, and within an exception package let's create a custom exception. For that choose Java class and let us give class name as account exception. Perfect. Next extend this exception from runtime exception, and within this class let us create a constructor with the name account exception, and then here just pass the message. So this message basically holds the error message, and let us pass this message to the super class constructor by using super method call over here. Perfect. Next let us take a look into next step. Next step is using account exception. Now we have created account exception. Next let us use this account exception in a account service sample class. So go to account service sample class, go to get account by ID method over here, and here instead of runtime exception, so let us use account exception. Okay, perfect. Next go to deposit method over here, and here also we have used runtime exception, so just remove this runtime exception and then use account exception. Similarly go to withdraw method, and here also runtime exception, so just remove it and then use account exception. Next go to delete account method, and here also we have used runtime exception, so instead of this let's use account exception. Okay, now we have removed the generic exception, that is runtime exception, and we have used our custom exception, that is account exception, in a required places. Okay, perfect. Next let us take a look into next step. Next step is create a error details class that holds the error response. So let us go back to our project, go to exception package over here, right click on it, new, and then choose Java class, and here select record. Let's give record name as error details and hit enter. Next let us define the fields for this record. So here just type local date time and let's give field name as timestamp. Well, this is the timestamp when the exception occur. And next string message, so this field holds the error message. Next string details, if the user or the client want more information about the exception, then we can store this in a details field. Next string error code, so we can also send the specific error code about the exception by using this error code field. Okay, perfect. Next we don't have to create a getter methods or the constructor to string equals hash code, because this is the record, so Java compiler will automatically provide all these boilerplate code. Next let us take a look into next step. Next step is create a global exception handler to handle the specific exceptions as well as generic exceptions. So let us go to our project again, and here go to exceptions package. Within that right click new and then choose Java class. Let's give class name as global exception handler. Hit enter. Next let us go ahead and let us annotate this class with @controller_advice annotation. Well, once we annotate this class with @controller_advice annotation, then this class becomes a global exception handler class, and within this class we can define the specific exceptions as well as generic exceptions. So basically, instead of writing the exception handling code for each and every controller, we basically create a single class and we annotate this class with @controller_advice annotation, and within this class we keep all the exception handling related code in a single place. Okay, perfect. Next within this class let us first handle the specific exceptions. So here let me write the comment handle specific exception. So in this case account exception. So this account exception is a specific exception that we are going to handle over here. So here just type public and let us give return type as response entity. Response entity is a generic class, we have to pass a type, So in this case, let us pass error details as a type, and let's give method name as handle account exception, and then let us first post parameter to this exception as a account exception. Let me maximize this. Next, let us pass web request as a second parameter to this method. Well, we'll get some request data from this object. Next, within this method, let us create an instance of error details class over here, new error details, and we can pass a data to the constructor. So first value is timestamp. For that, let's call local date time, and then it has now method. So this will basically return the current date time. Next is error message. So we can get the error message from this exception object. So here just call exception dot get message, and then third value, if you go to error details, you can see third value we can pass as a details to the constructor. So let's go back to global exception handler class, and here we can get the details from this web request. So just call web request dot get description. So instead of passing the entire description, we just need to pass the URL. For that, just pass false as a value to this get description method. Next, we need to pass the error code. So here let us give the error code as account underscore not found. Okay, perfect. Now we have created error details class with the proper error response. Next, let us have a return statement, return, and then new response entity, and then pass error details object in the body as a post parameter. Second parameter is the HTTP status. So here just call HTTP status dot not found. Perfect. Now we have created a method. Next, let us annotate this method with @exception handler annotation, and then pass the exception that we are going to handle, that is account exception. Perfect. Now we have written the exception handling logic that handles this specific exception, that is account exception. Let's go ahead and let's write the logic to handle generic exceptions. So here let me write the comment, handle generic exception. Well, if we get any exceptions other from these specific exceptions in our Spring Boot application, that should be handled by using this generic exception. Okay, so here just type public and then response entity, and then pass error details as a type. Next, give method name as handle generic exception. Alright, next let us pass exception as a first argument, and then web request as a second argument. So within this method, let's create an object of error details record class over here, and then pass values to the constructor. So first value is timestamp. For that, call local datetime dot now method, and then we need to pass error message. So we can get error message from exception object. So here exception dot get message, and then we need to pass the details. So we can get the details from web request object. So web request dot get description method, and then pass false as a value to the get description method. Next, we need to send the error code as well. For that, here just pass the error code internal server error. So if there are any exceptions other than the specific exceptions, we can tell the client that there is some internal server error. Next, here let us have return statement, return new response entity, and here just pass error details object in a body, and then HTTP status dot internal server error. Okay, perfect. Next, let us annotate this method with @exception handler annotation, and then pass the generic exception, that is exception dot class. Alright, so if there are any exceptions occurred other than the specific exception, that will be handled by this generic exception logic. Okay, perfect. Next, let us go ahead and let us rerun our Spring Boot application and let us test this change. So from here, let us stop and rerun the Spring Boot application. Well, our Spring Boot application is up and running. Next, let's go to the Postman client over here. And here, let us call get account by ID REST API. Well, before that, if you go to database table, and here you can see the account with ID 6 is exist in the database table. And in the Postman client, we are calling the get account by ID REST API with the account ID 3. Okay, now go ahead and click on send button. And there we go. In a response, you can see the details, timestamp, the message, account does not exist, details, the URL, and the error code, account not found. And look at here the HTTP status 404 not found. This response looks good, right? So this is how we can implement the exception handling in a Spring Boot application as per our requirement. Okay, so similarly, let us test the positive scenario, that is, if the account ID is exist in database, then we should get the correct response. So here click on send button and there we go. We got the correct response, right? Next, let us also test the deposit and withdraw REST API as well. So here click on send button and look at here the account with ID 6 is exist in database. That's why we are getting the valid response. And if I pass the invalid account ID, that is 3, then this REST API return the error response. Okay, this response looks good. Alright, next let us test the withdraw REST API and look at here the account with ID 3 is not exist in database. That's why we got the error response like this, and this is the correct error response as per our requirement. Next, if I pass the correct account ID in the URL and if I click on send button, we got the success error response. Next, let us also test the delete account REST API. So here let us select HTTP delete method over here and then pass account ID 3 in the URL. Well, the account with ID 3 is not exist in database. We should get the error response, right? So click on send button and there we go. Next, the account ID 6 is exist in database. So this should delete the account from the database and there we go. This is the success response. It means we have successfully implemented exception handling in our banking Spring Boot application. Alright, great.